I always say commit to the bit, so I guess if I'm gonna look like a lumberjack, I may as well dress like one. How is it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 influential films. As I'm sure you're all well aware, I am a film buff, even though I hate that term. I'm a movie fanatic. I live and breathe movies. I love talking about them, thinking about them, watching them, and ultimately making them. But with filmmaking, along with any other creative medium, you have to be inspired by something, and you have to start somewhere. You have to have some sort of creative spark in your imagination, and these are the films that sparked it for me. These are the films that inspire me to keep watching, to keep talking, and ultimately keep creating. If you've seen a few of my films before, a lot of these influences are going to be very apparent, but others have no similarities at all. They just really impacted how I see the art form of cinema. This list was not easy to narrow down, and there are tons of films that I could have thrown on here that have had a profound impact on me. But when I think about the films that have influenced me, these are probably the 10 I think about the most often. But I did limit myself to just one film per director, otherwise there'd probably be only 3 or 4 directors on this top 10. And also, this list is in no particular order. I'm not trying to rank them in terms of most influential. I'm just gonna list them off roughly in chronological order from when I saw them. So let's get right to it, but first, if you guys haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel and turned on notifications so you know when I put out new videos. And if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you were to give me a thumbs up and maybe share it with a few of your friends. Alright, so without further ado, here are my top 10 influential films. I started really loving film at a very young age. I used to make tons of movies even when I was 4 or 5 years old. And one of the films that had a profound impact on me during this period was The Lion King. It came out when I was 2 years old. I'm not sure if I saw it in theaters or not. I'm sure I did. But I definitely had it on VHS and watched it over and over and over again. And what this film really taught me, even from a young age, was how big a film could be. At the time, some of my favorite films were Disney's The Jungle Book, Robin Hood, things of that nature. And while those are good films, they don't really have the same sense of scale that The Lion King does. Even to this day, the film is just huge. Few animated films at that time were really at that scale, and few still are today. I can remember just being blown away from the stampede scene, Mufasa in the clouds, Simba running across the desert. Just everything in this movie felt monumental. And it's not just the size, the humor, the beautiful animation, just everything about this film really set the standard on what animation should be. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite animated films, which sort of leans into the next pick on my list, which is half animation and half live action. We're talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Still one of my favorite crime thrillers of all time. This is another one where it just hit me at the right age. I think I was about 7 years old at this point, and at that time I thought that films that were animated were for kids and films that were live action were for adults. And this was the first time I really saw them blended together for both. And ultimately, it was the first film that I watched where I felt grown up. And this one really captured my imagination just because of the technical aspect of it. At the time, I knew that the cartoon characters weren't actually there, but I was fascinated about how they pulled this off. I even remember researching about it on the early days of the internet, and once DVDs came around and I got it on that, it had tons of bonus features about the making of the film, which I would watch over and over again. It was just really captivating to me, and I loved watching the behind-the-scenes footage of them animating on the film, and watching what the film looked like before the characters were actually in the scenes. It just had a really big impact on me, and plus that was the first time I saw so many cartoon characters all come together. A lot of the characters that I grew up loving were all in one film, and it was really mind-blowing to me. Not only did you have the Disney characters, but you had Looney Tunes as well. And again, it was just one of those films that I watched so many times and it was so burned into my memory. And I'm pretty sure that I got the DVD in the first place because I watched the VHS so many times that it started to stop working. And overall, yes, it was just a huge influence on my creativity, and I personally would love to do a half live action, half animation hybrid someday. Maybe for Space Jam 3? Hit me up. Moving on now, we're getting to about junior high, and I don't think it should be a surprise for anyone that Halloween definitely has to be on my list. It was really the first horror movie that I really got into, and my brother and sister as well. Not only do I think it's the greatest slasher of all time, but I also think it's one of the best horrors of all time in general. And what I think this film really taught me was the power of suspense and the power of a great score. I'm serious, Halloween would be a good film without the score, but with the score, it makes everything twice as good. The film wouldn't be nearly as creepy without the iconic da 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 da. Oh, come on, I'm using my voice. But anyway, yeah, it really set the bar with my tastes of horror films, and I hope to someday take what I learned from Halloween and apply it to my own horror films. But I do feel that the power of a great score and great suspense can be applied to any genre. Action, drama, you can even use these tips in comedy. Hell, even in Unlucky, we try to use the score and building tension to our advantage. So I definitely think this can be applied to things outside of the horror bubble. But we're gonna keep in the horror sphere for a little bit longer as we talk about The Shining. This is another one that I watched around the same time period, 7th, 8th, or 9th grade, and what this film really taught me was about building dread and atmosphere. There are few films that are as atmospheric as The Shining. It gives you a feeling of isolation that few other films do, and how you can make absolutely nothing seem scary as hell. I think at one point one of the scariest things in the film, it just pops up Tuesday, but just the sound effect it makes, the jarring nature of it, really makes you jump out of your seat, even though it's absolutely nothing. Of course, there have been plenty of cheap jump scares over the years, but these ones are different. I don't know, man, it's The Shining. What else can I possibly say? Everyone's talked about it to death, even I've talked about it to death, and there's no question that it was a huge influence on me. And now we're moving on to high school, and right in my freshman year, a film came out that was very impactful to me. It was one of my favorite comedies, and it still is. I'm talking about Superbad. If you went to high school in the late 2000s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This really was the film of our generation. And I think it's just the perfect example of a film that hit me at just the right time where it really clicked. This of course came during the wave of Judd Apatow comedies, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, but this one was about high school kids, so it was immediately more relatable than any of these other films. And also looking back, I think it's still better than most of those films. It was really one of the first ones that I saw where the jokes really moved the story forward, instead of just the actors sitting around spewing out one-liners to each other. And of course, Superbad does have that too to a certain degree, but it seems like everything matters and everything is moving the story forward. When I think about my time working on Unlucky, I can definitely see Superbad as one of the main driving forces on how we cultivated that story. But yes, just another great film, incredibly influential, impactful, and still, in my opinion, probably my favorite comedy. I'm gonna be looping this film into my high school years as well, even though I saw it when I was way younger. It was a film that was always on the TV when I was growing up at my grandparents' house, at my house, but it wasn't until maybe freshman, sophomore year of high school where I really started to get it. I had always heard from adults growing up that The Godfather was one of the best films ever made, if not the best film ever made. And again, growing up in an Italian-American household, it just seemed like it was something that was always on TV. I would see bits and pieces of it here and there, and it was usually on cable, so it was heavily censored. So the first time I think myself had the intuition to watch it start to finish by myself was probably freshman or sophomore year of high school. That's when I really thought I'd be able to take it in and have the attention span to sit through a 3-hour film. And it changed my life extraordinarily. It heavily impacted how I see cinema as an art form. It taught me about family. It taught me about history. It was probably one of the most profound films for me in terms of character development, particularly with Michael Corleone. I had seen character development in films prior to this, obviously, but I think this is where it was handled the absolute best. And it was shocking to me at the time because the characters in the films I was watching usually ended up in a better place at the end, but in this one we see a generally good-natured person go down and down and down deep into the depths of evil. From an outside perspective, I still think he's badass. But you know what I mean, it's definitely not a positive character arc, it's a negative one. And besides the story and just that I'm generally interested in it because of my Italian heritage, just every shot in this movie is absolutely beautiful. And it looks way older than it is. I didn't even realize it was shot in the 70s. I thought it was shot in the 40s or 50s. And from a directing and cinematography perspective, this one was heavily influential, especially when I was doing films like Ristretto. That opening shot in Ristretto where the camera just dollies back and back until you reveal the main character, that was ripped right out of The Godfather. And skipping forward a couple years, another film that was heavily influential on my directorial style was Fight Club. I didn't really know who David Fincher was before I watched this film, but I sure as hell knew who he was after, and went back and watched everything that he ever did. This film has sort of become a meme in recent years as the poster child for college sophomores who think it's saying something incredibly deep and they quote it all the time. Just a typical douchebag type of movie. And while I can understand a lot of people's critiques, I still think it's an absolute masterpiece. It was obviously hugely fundamental on how I direct films. If you've seen Unlucky, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think the biggest thing that this film taught me was not just to have a twist ending, but to have a twist ending that makes you want to rewatch the entire film again and see it from a completely new perspective. Again, there were other films that I saw that did this, like The Sixth Sense, but frankly, in my opinion, I just like Fight Club way better. I just love everything about it. The mood, the atmosphere, the performances, and how it just just comes all together under possibly my favorite director, David Fincher's vision. Again, some people think it's overrated, but I respectfully disagree. And another film that's sort of become a college dorm room type of film is Donnie Darko. I actually watched this and Fight Club for the first time in the same night, so needless to say, it was a very influential night. I don't know, the stars and the planets must have really just aligned that night for some reason. This film is admittedly kind of dated now, and I don't like it as much as I used to back then, but it was still highly influential in the way that I see films. And I think one of the most powerful aspects of this film is actually its soundtrack. It just has way too many classics in there to count, and every time I happen to hear one of these songs on the radio or Spotify or whatever, I immediately think of Donnie Darko and it puts me right in that mood. I don't know if I had seen a film at that point where the music was such in the forefront, and it really is the driving force in what sets the tone and the atmosphere. And it helped me really get into 80s music. Besides that, I enjoyed just sort of the abstract storytelling that wasn't too out there that you couldn't follow along. But I also love films that are really far out there, and that's why my next pick is Eraserhead. So we're getting into freshman year of college at this point, and I had a friend who recommended this film to me, and I didn't really know what it was about then, and I still don't know what it's about now, actually. Again, it's really abstract storytelling, it doesn't hold your hand at all, and I think what I respect about this film the most is David Lynch's approach to it afterward. Because he doesn't tell you what it's about, and he's not going to. People have been asking him for what, almost 50 years what this film is about, and he won't tell anyone. And I really respect that. Personally, it's just a pet peeve of mine when directors have to come out and say what their film is about, instead of just letting the audience have their own interpretations of it. Because your interpretation of what Eraserhead is about is exactly right, and it's exactly wrong at the same time. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and they can see the film however they want. And I do appreciate the fact that even though it is very abstract and out there, you can interpret messages from it. And it does somewhat have a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's impossible to just write it off as nonsense, which you could probably do with some other art house films. And the last film on my list isn't a traditional narrative film at all, it's a documentary actually. Not only is this my favorite documentary film, but it's also my favorite film about filmmaking. I'm talking about American Movie Man. This one again hit me at just the right time, freshman year of college. I was just getting into school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Of course, I made films a ton when I was a kid, but it wasn't something I thought I could continue as an adult. And this film really changed all of that. If you've never heard of American Movie before, I highly recommend that you check it out, especially if you want to pursue any sort of creative medium, but especially filmmaking. From the very first time I saw this film, it immediately clicked to me that this should be required viewing for all film students. If I ever end up teaching a college class, this is going to be day one. Because I think if you have any sort of creative aspirations in your life, this film needs to be absolutely essential. For me, I don't think I've ever seen a film that was as relatable as American Movie. The film is about Mark Borchardt, an eccentric director who just wants to achieve the American dream and create what he calls the American movie. Watching this film was one of the main reasons I actually started to take filmmaking seriously when I got into college, and if it wasn't for this film, I don't think I would be sitting here today making this video. I don't think I would have worked on Hell at Heathridge, Unlucky, any of the things that I've done if it wasn't for American Movie. It took me back to my childhood when I was running around with my VHS camera making videos with my friends, and all the trials and tribulations that would come along the way. And although all the odds are stacked against him in the film, he always remains positive. And sure, there are some depressing elements in the film, but ultimately it lifts you up and makes you feel inspired. Inspired to just do the best you can and never give up. Again, I love it just so much. It's so burned into my brain, and I think actually I'm gonna go watch it right now. So that is it for this time, guys. What are the top 10 films that influenced you? I would absolutely love to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going down in the comments below. And again, if you guys haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. I come out with new videos almost every week. And again, it would help me out tremendously if you were to give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Also, let me know down in the comments section below what you would like to see next from me on the channel. And let me know if you end up watching any of these films, what you think about them. Again, just thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.